My name is Claire Dawson, and if life has taught me anything, it's that survival can look quiet from the outside. At 32, I've learned how to keep the lights on, how to smile through exhaustion, and how to make peanut butter sandwiches feel like a celebration for my son, Noah. 2 jobs, a handful of freelance gigs, and a heart stitched together by willpower, that's my life. When the cream-colored envelope arrived, I almost threw it away. My cousin Vanessa Holt's engagement dinner. Gilded lettering. Perfect penmanship. It screamed wealth, control, and everything I'd left behind years ago. We hadn't spoken in months, not since she made a snide joke at a baby shower about me collecting diapers and regrets. I laughed it off then, pretending it didn't sting. But it did. Some wounds just learn to wear makeup. My mother called 3 times that week. Just go, Claire, she said, voice laced with that familiar insistence. Smile. Be polite. Don't cause a scene. That was her mantra for life, appearances first, feelings later. So I went. For her. For the illusion that I still belonged somewhere. For Noah, who deserved to see me walk into any room without shrinking. The night of the dinner, I pulled my nicest dress from the back of the closet. It fit tighter than I remembered, and the fabric had lost a little of its glow, but it would do. My neighbor lent me a pair of heels, half a size too small, but close enough. And Noah, with his tiny fingers and oversized heart, picked my necklace. This one, he said, pointing to a silver heart pendant. Because it looks like mine. It was enough to make me feel brave for a moment. The restaurant was the kind of place that whispered money, dim lights, white tablecloths, and the sound of expensive laughter bouncing off polished marble. I felt ice skim over me as I stepped in. The kind of glances people give when they've already decided your story. I smiled anyway. That's what you do when you're used to walking through judgment. You learn to armor yourself in grace. We checked in with the hostess, who led us toward the back. As I passed the tables, I could feel the subtle pause in conversation, the quiet calculation. It wasn't hatred, it was pity dressed up in politeness. And pity always cuts deeper. My mother waved from across the room, seated among familiar faces that hadn't seen me since my life stopped fitting their expectations. I kissed Noah's head, told him to go play with the kids, and took my place at the table. The laughter around me was warm, but not for me. I was there, yet apart. The quiet disappointment in a family of achievers. Vanessa hadn't arrived yet, but her presence was already in the air, perfect, composed, untouchable. She'd been the golden child since we were kids, while I was the warning story whispered over coffee cups. She got the scholarships, the applause, the admiration. I got the reminder to do better next time. Still, I told myself to breathe. To get through the evening with dignity intact. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe they'd see me for more than my mistakes, but deep down, I knew better. When Vanessa finally walked in, sleek hair, flawless dress, diamond glinting on her finger, the room lit up. Compliments spilled in waves. She floated through the crowd, all soft laughs and feigned humility. And for a second, her gaze landed on me. Sharp. Measured. The kind of look that could slice open old insecurities without ever raising its voice. I smiled first. Because that's what survivors do. She smiled back, thin, polite, and distant. The stage was set. The lines were drawn. That night, I didn't realize the truth waiting beneath the surface, that I would walk out of this dinner not as their joke, but as their mirror. The cracks would show. The room would turn. And for once in my life, someone else would finally stand up. Not for an image, but for me, and that moment would change everything. The hostess guided me to the far end of a long, candlelit table, the kind that forces you to watch the celebration from a polite distance. My mother sat beside me, posture perfect, smile strained. On my other side was Aunt Martha, who immediately began showing me pictures of her dog in Halloween costumes. Pretending she didn't notice how out of place I looked. I nodded, murmured cute at the right times, and kept my eyes on the folded napkin in front of me. That napkin was safer than the people around it. Vanessa Holt meanwhile, was in her element. She floated between guests like a spotlight that never dimmed, laughing softly, accepting compliments, touching arms as if blessing the room. Every motion was deliberate, every word choreographed. Watching her was like watching a movie I'd seen too many times. Eventually, she reached my end of the table. The air shifted slightly, as if everyone expected a scene. Claire, she greeted, her voice dipped in sugar. You came alone? I smiled, steady. Just me and Noah. Oh, she said, lips curving upward in that way that wasn't quite a smile. Well, the kids' table is that way. She gestured toward the corner, already turning away before I could answer. The words stung sharper than they should have. She didn't need to raise her voice. Dismissal has its own volume. My mother leaned toward me, whispering as though it would soften the blow. Just keep your head down. You look nice tonight. Nice. Not beautiful. Not brave. Just nice. A word so small it could disappear between sighs. The dinner moved forward like a rehearsed play, applause for speeches, laughter for shallow jokes. I played my part, passing butter, nodding on cue, pretending I didn't feel the quiet wall between us. Every conversation brushed the surface but never dove deeper. To them, I was the single mother, polite, fragile, contained. From across the room, I could see Noah at the kids' table, his face glowing under the warm lights. He was drawing spaceships on a napkin, making sound effects under his breath. He didn't care about designer clothes or whispered judgments. He existed in color, in joy, in the safety of imagination. Watching him steadied me, but the laughter at my table wasn't innocent. I could feel the undercurrent, the comparisons, the pity disguised as curiosity. "It's impressive how she manages on her own," one aunt murmured. "Bless her heart." Bless her heart, the phrase people use when they're too polite to say they pity you. I kept smiling, my armor of grace never cracking. Because that's what you do when you've been underestimated long enough. You learn to endure silence louder than applause. Halfway through the meal, Richard, Vanessa's father, raised his glass. "We couldn't be prouder of our girl," he said, voice booming. Vanessa always knew what she wanted in life. Every word landed like a quiet reminder of what I wasn't. I swallowed hard, forcing down both the food and the ache. This was how my family worked. They dressed judgment in celebration and called it love. They built pedestals for some and polite corners for others, but that night, I felt something stir, a small, defiant pulse deep in my chest. A whisper saying, "You don't have to keep taking this." I didn't know then that the whisper would soon find a voice. That someone else in that same room, the last person anyone expected, was listening too, and before the night was over. That voice would break the script. It wouldn't just change how they saw me. It would change everything they thought they knew about themselves. Dinner stretched on, long enough for smiles to stiffen and wine to blur good manners. I'd become an expert at invisibility, passing bread, pretending to listen, letting the noise roll past me like distant thunder. Every clink of glass and polished laugh carried the same undertone. You're not one of us anymore. At the kids' table, Noah was coloring his napkin spaceship, humming softly. I watched him for grounding. That tiny boy was my proof of purpose, living, breathing resilience with dimples. Then the waiters cleared the plates, and Vanessa Holt stood up. She didn't need to ask for attention, the room offered it automatically. Her diamond ring caught the light as she tapped her champagne flute, and the chatter dimmed to a reverent hush. "I just want to say," she began, her smile polished to perfection, "how grateful I am to be surrounded by so much love tonight." Polite applause followed. Glasses lifted. Compliments waited on standby, and then she turned her gaze toward me. "I just hope," she said with a soft laugh, "I never end up like some people, single, pushing 30, and raising a kid alone." The laughter came fast. Real, unrestrained laughter. Not awkward or hesitant, comfortable, collective, cruel. Someone clapped. Richard, her father, shook his head, chuckling. "You know what they say," he added, voice booming through the room. "Men don't want used goods. That's just how it is." Even my mother gave a small, embarrassed laugh, covering her mouth as if that made it better. The sound burned through me like acid. My hand tightened around my napkin, twisting the fabric until it trembled. I could feel the heat crawling up my neck, the rush of blood in my ears. I didn't look up. If I did, I knew I'd break. Not one voice cut through the laughter. Not one word of protest. People looked away. Some smirked. Others looked uncomfortable. But stayed quiet because silence was easier than courage. I'd been their scapegoat for so long. They didn't even recognize cruelty anymore. It had become their dinner entertainment. Across the room, Noah laughed at something a waiter said, his world still untouched by the poison swirling in mine. That was the only thing that kept me still. I wouldn't give them the show they wanted. Inside, though, I was unraveling every whisper of "poor Claire," every family photo I hadn't been invited to, every congratulatory speech that pretended I didn't exist, all of it pressed down on my chest at once. And still, I stayed seated. Not because I was weak, but because I refused to let them see me cracked. I reminded myself, I am not what they say I am, but the weight of their laughter made it hard to breathe. Aunt Martha leaned in, her perfume thick and sweet. "Oh, honey, don't take it personally," she whispered. "Vanessa just likes to be the center of attention." It wasn't about attention. It was about power. About reminding me where I stood, at the edge of their table, their world, their respect. And for a moment, I hated myself for staying silent. Then something strange happened. The laughter began to fade. Not because of guilt, but because someone else had stood up. At first, I thought it was a waiter. Then I saw him Adam Vanessa's fiancé. He pushed his chair back slowly, the sound cutting through the room like a blade. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone. He started walking, not toward the bar. Not toward the exit, toward me. Conversation stuttered. Forks froze midair. Even Vanessa blinked, confused, her laugh dissolving into silence. Adam stopped beside me, his jaw tight, eyes clear. I think they should know something, he said. The room went still, utter, suffocating stillness. I looked up at him, confused, heart pounding. And though I didn't know it yet, this was the moment everything would change, because what Adam was about to say would tear open the illusion they'd built, and finally, the truth would have a voice. All eyes turned to Adam. The clinking glasses, the murmured gossip, everything froze midair. Even the chandelier light seemed to dim, leaving him in quiet defiance at the center of the room. Adam, Vanessa said, her smile faltering for the first time that night. What are you doing? He didn't answer her. His eyes were on me, the silence stretched so long that even the air felt heavy. I'm tired of pretending, he finally said. His voice was low but steady, cutting through the tension like a blade wrapped in velvet. You all laugh at Claire, talk about her like she's some cautionary tale. But maybe you should know why she's really here tonight, why she deserves more respect than any of you. The words dropped like stones into deep water. Vanessa blinked, still forcing a smile, her nails gripping her champagne glass. Adam, she said again, this time sharper. Sit down. You're making a scene. He ignored her. Claire didn't just raise Noah on her own, he continued, turning to the table. She sacrificed everything. While some of us were busy showing off promotions and vacations, she was holding a family together after being abandoned by someone sitting right here. A hush fell across the table. The laughter died in the throats that had once mocked me. Adam, stop it, Vanessa hissed, but he didn't. He looked straight at Richard Holt, her father, the man who'd raised her to believe cruelty was charm. You knew what your daughter did, he said. You helped her hide it. Gasps rippled through the room. My chest tightened. I had no idea what he was about to reveal, but it wasn't my secret to tell. Vanessa's perfect composure fractured. Adam, please, she whispered. Not here. Here, he repeated. Exactly here. He turned to me again, softer now. You remember when Vanessa was still in school? When she vanished for 3 months, and the family said it was a study abroad program? The room was so quiet that even the ticking wall clock seemed intrusive. She wasn't studying, Adam said. She was hiding a pregnancy. And when she came back, she didn't have a baby anymore, because Claire took him in. She's the one who raised him. The child Vanessa gave away. The world tilted. For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. My mother covered her mouth in shock. Aunt Martha dropped her fork. And Vanessa, her face drained of color, her body trembling, looked at me as if I'd stolen her reflection. That's not true, she stammered. He's lying. But the lie cracked under the weight of truth, everyone could see it in her eyes. Adam's voice softened, almost regretful now. I found the old hospital records, Vanessa. You signed the papers yourself. Claire took that baby, Noah, because you didn't want anyone to know. I sat frozen. The words echoed in my skull. Noah. My son, not by blood, but by choice. The world blurred at the edges. I could feel the stares, the whispers, the quiet unraveling of years of judgment. Vanessa stood, her hands shaking. You had no right, you had no heart, Adam interrupted, his tone final. And Claire has been living with your silence ever since. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one who felt small. Vanessa's facade collapsed entirely. She turned and fled the room, heels clicking in uneven rhythm. Her family sat in stunned silence, the pillars of their arrogance crumbling one breath at a time. Adam looked down at me, his voice almost a whisper. I'm sorry it had to be this way. But you deserved the truth. I wanted to speak, to thank him, but all I could do was nod. The quiet that followed wasn't cruel anymore, it was cleansing. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like exile. It felt like freedom. The silence in the room wasn't peaceful, it was the kind that crackled with tension, thick and suffocating. Vanessa's face had gone from pale to flushed, her carefully applied makeup suddenly looking garish under the restaurant's warm lighting. Her hands gripped the edge of the table as she stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. Adam, what are you doing? Her voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet like glass shattering. This is our engagement dinner. You're making a scene. He turned to face her, and for the first time that evening, Claire saw something in his expression that wasn't gentle or accommodating. It was resolve, clear, unwavering, and impossible to ignore. I'm not making a scene, Vanessa, he said quietly, his tone level but firm. You already did that when you humiliated someone who's shown me more kindness than most people in this room ever have. Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes darted around the table, searching for allies, for someone to validate her indignation. But no one spoke. The guests who had laughed so easily moments before now studied their plates, their wine glasses. Anything but the confrontation unfolding before them. You're embarrassing me, Vanessa hissed, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper that still carried across the table. In front of my family. In front of everyone. Adam's jaw tightened. You did that on your own. The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward. Claire watched as Vanessa's father, Richard, a man who'd always carried himself with the unearned confidence of old money and older prejudices, pushed back from the table. His face was red, his movements deliberate as he stood. "Now see here, Adam," Richard began, his voice booming with the authority he was accustomed to wielding without question. "I don't know what kind of emotional nonsense this is, but this is neither the time nor the place. Vanessa has worked hard to plan this evening, and you're turning it into some kind of therapy session." Adam didn't flinch. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and met Richard's glare with calm steadiness. "With all due respect, sir, this isn't about therapy. It's about basic human decency, something that seems to have been forgotten at this table." Richard's face darkened further. But Adam continued before he could interrupt. "2 years ago, when I lost my job and couldn't see a way forward, I was drowning. My family was stressed, I was depressed, and I felt worthless." His voice remained steady, but Claire could hear the raw honesty beneath it. "Claire didn't know me well. We'd met maybe twice at family gatherings. But when she heard I was struggling, she reached out. Not because she wanted something from me, not because it would benefit her, but because she saw someone who needed help." He turned slightly, gesturing toward Claire without looking away from Richard. "She spent hours helping me rebuild my resume when she could have been sleeping after her own double shifts. She watched my niece so my sister could help me with job interviews. She checked in on me when no one else thought to ask if I was okay. She did all of this while raising her son alone, working 2 jobs, and dealing with judgment from people who should have been supporting her." The restaurant felt impossibly still. Even the waitstaff had retreated to the edges of the room, sensing the weight of what was unfolding. "So when you ask me what I'm doing," Adam said, his voice growing stronger, "I'm doing what someone should have done a long time ago. I'm reminding everyone here that real strength isn't about perfection or appearances or having everything look flawless from the outside. It's about surviving. It's about providing for the people you love when everything feels impossible. It's about giving to others even when you have nothing left to give yourself." He paused, letting his words settle over the room like a blanket of truth that couldn't be shaken off or ignored. "That's what Claire does every single day. And tonight, instead of celebrating her strength, you all chose to mock it. To laugh at it. To treat her like she's less than you because her life doesn't fit your narrow definition of success." Richard opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The scaffolding of arrogance that had propped up this family's social hierarchy for so long was crumbling, and everyone could feel it falling away, brick by brick, leaving only exposed foundations of hypocrisy and hollow pride. Adam's words hung in the air like a bell that had been rung, impossible to unhear, resonating in every corner of the room. Claire sat frozen, her hands still gripping the napkin in her lap so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. She hadn't asked for this. Hadn't expected anyone to stand up for her, especially not here, especially not now. For so long, she'd learned to make herself smaller, quieter, less of a burden to everyone around her, but Adam had made her visible. He turned away from Richard and Vanessa, away from the judgment and the silence, and walked the few steps to where Claire sat at the edge of the table. When he reached her, he crouched down slightly, bringing himself to her eye level. His expression had softened, the hardness that had faced down Vanessa and her father replaced by something gentler, respect. Maybe, or recognition. "You didn't deserve that," he said quietly. His voice meant only for her even though the entire room was listening. "Any of it. Not tonight, not ever." Claire's throat tightened. She wanted to say something, to thank him, to tell him that his words had cracked something open inside her that had been sealed shut for years. But all she could manage was a small nod, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. "Not here. Not in front of them." Adam seemed to understand. He straightened, giving her shoulder the briefest touch, not pity, not patronizing comfort, but solidarity. A gesture that said, "I see you, and you matter." As he stepped back, Claire became aware of movement to her left. Her mother, who had sat silent through Vanessa's cruel joke, through the laughter, through Adam's entire speech, was staring at her daughter with an expression Claire had rarely seen on her face, regret. Her mother's hand moved across the table, trembling slightly, as if reaching for something she'd lost a long time ago and only now realized was missing. She didn't touch Claire, didn't speak. But her eyes, watery and filled with a recognition that came far too late, told a story of complicity. Of silence chosen over courage, of a mother who had failed to protect her child from a family's casual cruelty. "Claire, I?" Her mother started, her voice barely above a whisper, but Claire couldn't hear whatever apology or explanation was coming. Not yet. The wound was too fresh, the pattern too deeply established. Her mother had chosen comfort over courage too many times for one moment of regret to heal years of abandonment disguised as family loyalty. Around them, the room remained suspended in uncomfortable stillness. Aunt Martha stared at her empty wine glass as if it held answers she desperately needed. Other relatives shifted in their seats, suddenly fascinated by the texture of the tablecloth or the pattern on their plates. The laughter that had come so easily before now seemed impossible. As if it had belonged to different people in a different lifetime, Vanessa still stood at the head of the table, her face a mask of humiliation and fury. She opened her mouth several times as if to speak, but each time, no words emerged. What could she say? How could she defend mockery that had been so thoroughly exposed? Richard had returned to his seat but looked diminished somehow, his earlier bluster deflated. The authority he'd wielded so confidently had revealed itself as nothing more than social bullying, effective only when everyone agreed to play along. Claire felt something shift inside her chest. Like a weight she'd carried for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand without it. Adam's stand hadn't been romantic. There was no grand gesture of love, no dramatic declaration. It was something more fundamental than that, it was moral. It was someone choosing truth over comfort, choosing to call out wrong even when silence would have been easier. His respect had exposed everyone else's shame, the balance in the room had changed. Claire could feel it in the way people avoided her eyes now, not out of superiority, but out of guilt. She wasn't the one who should be ashamed. She never had been. And finally, in this moment, with Adam's words still echoing around them, everyone else in the room was beginning to understand that. No apologies were spoken aloud. No one rushed to Claire's side with belated support or hollow words of encouragement. But something had fundamentally shifted. The narrative that had defined her place in this family, the struggling single mother who should be grateful for tolerance, had been shattered. In its place was a new story. A woman of quiet strength who had been misjudged by people too comfortable in their privilege to recognize real courage when it sat at their table. Claire took a slow, steady breath. For the first time all evening, she felt like she could breathe fully, like the tight band around her chest had finally loosened. She glanced toward the children's table where Noah sat, still absorbed in his coloring, blissfully unaware of the adult drama unfolding around him. His innocence, his joy in simple things, reminded her why she'd endured nights like this in the first place. Everything she did, every sacrifice, every moment of exhaustion and doubt, it was all for him. And nothing anyone in this room said or thought could diminish that purpose. Claire stood slowly, her movements deliberate and calm. Every eye in the room tracked her as she gathered her small purse from the back of her chair and smoothed down the front of her dress, the one she'd worried wasn't nice enough. The one she'd spent 20 minutes steaming to remove the wrinkles. The one that suddenly didn't matter at all. She walked toward the children's table. Her footsteps quiet but steady on the restaurant's polished floor. Noah looked up as she approached, his face brightening instantly with the uncomplicated joy that only children possess. He held up his paper proudly, a colorful spaceship drawn in bold crayon strokes, complete with flames coming from the engines and stars scattered across the page. "Mom, look. It's the Starfire 3000, he announced, using the elaborate name he'd invented for his imaginary spacecraft. It can travel faster than light and has shields that can't be broken. Claire crouched down beside him, really looking at the drawing, the care he'd taken with each detail. The way he'd colored outside the lines but didn't care because the picture told the story he wanted to tell. She felt her chest tighten, but this time it wasn't from shame or hurt. It was love, pure and uncomplicated. "It's perfect," she said softly, running her finger along the edge of the paper. "The best spaceship I've ever seen." Noah beamed, then carefully began gathering his crayons and putting them back in their box, a routine they'd practiced countless times. He sensed, in the way children often do, that something had changed, that it was time to go. "Are we leaving?" he asked, not upset, just curious. "Yes, sweetheart. It's time to go home." He nodded, accepting this without question, and slipped his small hand into hers. Together, they turned toward the exit. Claire didn't look back at the table, didn't offer goodbyes or explanations. She didn't owe anyone that courtesy, not after tonight, but as she passed Adam, who had returned to his seat but remained silent, their eyes met. He gave her a small nod, barely perceptible, nothing dramatic or attention-seeking. It was a quiet acknowledgement, a silent promise that what he'd said wasn't just words spoken in the heat of the moment. He had meant every syllable. She had been seen. She had been valued. Claire returned the nod. A gesture of gratitude she couldn't yet voice. And continued walking, and behind her, she could feel the weight of unspoken thoughts. The discomfort of people confronting their own behavior for the first time. She imagined Vanessa seething in her humiliation. Richard trying to reassert control over a situation that had slipped entirely from his grasp. Her mother sitting with regret she didn't yet know how to express, but those were their problems now, their burdens to carry. Claire had spent too many years carrying the weight of other people's judgments, their expectations, their narrow definitions of worth and success. Tonight, she was setting that weight down. The night air hit her face as they stepped outside, cool and clean after the suffocating atmosphere of the restaurant. The parking lot was quiet, lit by street lamps that cast long shadows across the pavement. Noah swung their joined hands as they walked toward her car. Humming a tune he'd made up about spaceships and adventures, Claire unlocked the car and helped Noah into his booster seat, buckling him in with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this thousands of times. As she closed his door and walked around to the driver's side, she paused. Resting her hand on the car's roof and looking up at the night sky, the stars were visible tonight, scattered across the darkness like the ones Noah had drawn on his picture. She thought about all the nights she'd stood under similar skies, exhausted from double shifts, worried about bills and childcare and whether she was doing enough, being enough, but tonight felt different. The laughter that had wounded her so deeply just an hour ago now felt meaningless, like noise from a world that no longer had power over her. Those people, with their judgment and their casual cruelty, couldn't touch the core of who she was, a mother who loved her son. A woman who helped others even when she had little to give. Someone who survived and kept going even when everything felt impossible. She slid into the driver's seat and caught Noah's eye in the rearview mirror. He was looking out the window, still lost in his imaginative worlds. Safe and loved and blissfully unaware that his mother had just walked away from a battle she'd already won, not by fighting back with the same cruelty that had been directed at her, but by refusing to let it define her worth. Claire started the engine, the familiar sound grounding her in the present moment. As she pulled out of the parking lot, she didn't look back at the restaurant's glowing windows. There was nothing behind her that she needed anymore. She was leaving not in defeat, but in dignity. And that made all the difference. The road ahead was dark but clear, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Claire felt light. Not because her circumstances had changed. She would still wake up tomorrow to the same challenges, the same exhausting routine, the same financial struggles. But something inside her had shifted, settled, found its proper place. She was enough. She had always been enough. And living without shame, without the need for approval from people who had never truly seen her, that was its own form of unforgettable revenge. Real strength has never been about volume or spectacle. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare or demand recognition. It exists in the quiet moments, in the mother who works 2 jobs and still finds energy to help her son with homework. In the person who offers kindness when they have little left to give. In the decision to keep going when every logical reason says to quit. Claire Dawson had been demonstrating that strength every single day of her life. But it had taken Adam's intervention for others to finally see it. Not because her strength was invisible, but because they had chosen not to look. Because acknowledging her resilience would have required them to examine their own comfort, their own privilege, their own choices to judge rather than understand. The real lesson of that evening wasn't about vindication or revenge. It was about the quiet power of living authentically, of refusing to internalize other people's limited perspectives, of understanding that dignity cannot be given or taken away by anyone else, it can only be claimed or surrendered by ourselves. Claire's calm resilience throughout the dinner, her refusal to lash out or break down despite the cruelty aimed at her, revealed more truth than any dramatic confrontation could have. She didn't need to defend herself because her life, her choices, her sacrifices, her unwavering commitment to her son, spoke louder than any words. Adam's courage demonstrated something equally important, that silence can be complicity. For years, Claire's family had maintained a social order that elevated some while diminishing others. And everyone had played their part by either actively participating in the mockery or passively allowing it to continue. Adam's decision to speak up, to risk his own comfort and social standing, showed that one honest voice truly can change a room. It wasn't romantic heroism that motivated him. It was memory, the visceral recollection of what it felt like to be drowning, to be judged, to be considered less than. And it was gratitude for the person who had seen past his circumstances to his humanity, who had offered help without conditions or expectations. In choosing to honor that debt publicly, Adam didn't just defend Claire. He held up a mirror to everyone in that room, forcing them to see their own reflections, the laughers, the silent enablers, the people who had prioritized social comfort over basic kindness. The aftermath of that evening rippled outward in ways both visible and invisible. Vanessa's engagement party became a story that would be whispered about in the family for years, though the moral would be interpreted differently depending on who told it. Some would see it as a scandal, an embarrassment, a breach of social etiquette. Others, hopefully, would recognize it as a necessary reckoning. But the most important change happened in Claire herself. She had always known her worth intellectually, had told herself repeatedly that other people's opinions didn't define her. But knowing something and truly believing it are different things entirely. That night, walking out of the restaurant with her head high and her son's hand in hers, Claire felt the difference. She didn't need revenge because she had something far more valuable, self-knowledge. She understood that her life, with all its struggles and imperfections, was honest and meaningful in ways that comfortable privilege could never be. She had nothing to prove to anyone because she had already proven everything that mattered to herself. the story closes with Claire stepping into the night, lighter and freer than she'd been in years. The weight of family expectations and judgment had lifted, not because those people had changed their minds, most hadn't, but because she had finally, fully stopped giving them power over her sense of self, living without shame, refusing to apologize for circumstances beyond her control, choosing to define success by love and resilience rather than money and status. That was Claire's quiet, unforgettable revenge. Not against specific people, but against a system of judgment that tried to diminish her, and in the end, that was the lesson they never expected, that the person they had pitted and mocked was actually the strongest one in the room. That real wealth couldn't be measured in bank accounts or designer clothes. That the life they considered lesser was actually richer in all the ways that truly mattered. Claire drove home that night knowing that tomorrow would bring the same challenges, the alarm clock at 5 a.m., the juggling of jobs and childcare, the constant calculation of which bills could wait another week. But she would face those challenges differently now, carrying herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her worth couldn't be diminished by anyone's laughter. And somewhere in that upscale restaurant, in the uncomfortable silence that followed Claire's departure, perhaps a few people began to understand that they had been measuring success with the wrong metrics all along. That the real failure wasn't struggling or being different, it was treating kindness as weakness and cruelty as social currency. The truth had been spoken. The shame had been redistributed to those who actually deserved it. And Claire Dawson, single mother, double shift worker, quiet giver of grace, she was free.